This second video on statistical relationships is really to help you identify the type of relationship. And this is important for research design purposes and analysis. And so you will have test questions on what type of relationship is this. So the previous video goes into a little more detail on what a statistical relationship is. But basically, we're talking about when a change in one variable occurs in a specific way with a change in another variable. So there's a systematic relationship. There needs to be two variables or more. We're focusing on two variables for the purpose of this class. And there are two different types that we talked about. So again, previous video if you want more detail on this, but what we're going to really focus on today is identifying the differences between groups versus our relationships between quantitative variables. And to do that, what we want to look at is what type of variables we have. So if we have a categorical variable and we want to look at the difference in some quantitative variable across those categories, then that is a difference between groups. So you need one categorical variable and one quantitative. And then for a relationship between variables, you're going to have two quantitative variables or two interval ratio. So let's talk about example one. Deep breathing exercises are more effective at reducing test anxiety than positive visualization. This statement is falsifiable, which we need for our research purposes, part of science. And probably your first look at it, you might, if you're new to this, you might be thinking, oh, there's three variables here. But there's actually only two variables. The first is the type of coping technique, coping mechanism, or test anxiety reduction, whatever you'd like to call it. But this deep breathing exercise is the first level of that categorical variable. And this is phrased to sound like a causal relationship. And so this would be our independent variable. We think that it's going to have an effect on reducing test anxiety. And so we're looking at this deep breathing exercises versus positive visualization. And that's our second level of the categorical independent variable. And we're looking to see, do those two levels affect test anxiety differently? So is there a difference between them? So in this example, we have a D relationship, a difference between groups. And it might help you to draw it out. You can think of it as, how would we graph this? Well, we would look at the mean of test anxiety. So we would have test anxiety here, and I'm just going to say that it's 0 to 100. And we would want to see that mean average score between the groups. And so we would say, okay, we think deep breathing exercises, they're going to have lower test anxieties. This is our deep breathing group versus our positive visualization group, which I'm going to call PV. And so this would reflect what we're expecting based on the statement, that people who did deep breathing exercises have a lower test anxiety mean than people who have that use positive visualization. So the idea here again is that we're comparing our coping strategies, or whatever you'd like to call this variable. We're comparing the two different levels, and we're comparing them through our dependent variable. That's what we're trying to see if they affected something. So we're trying to see if they affected test anxiety. So this is a difference between groups. So a difference in test anxiety between group 1 and group 2, category 1, category 2, but we're comparing test anxiety across those two levels. So this is a D relationship, a difference between groups. All right, so our next example. Do students at Fresno State, a lowercase that, with higher self-esteem also have higher grade point averages or GPAs? So just as a reminder, students is not a variable. That is just our population of interest and our sample. But we want to find our variables. So we can see higher self-esteem. This is our first quantitative variable. And I didn't mention this in the previous example, but if you have a psychological construct, so it's not like I can jab you with a needle and measure your self-esteem level. We have to go about it in a more indirect way. And so this is a psychological construct. Unless I tell you otherwise, we're going to measure that on a scale. So there may be times when psychological constructs are measured as categories, but I would make that clear to you. So something like higher tells us that it's a number as well, but typically self-esteem is measured with some type of scale or by counting behaviors. It just depends on your operational definition. So unless I tell you otherwise, psychological constructs like self-esteem are going to be quantitative. So do students at Fresno State with higher self-esteem also have higher grade point averages? And this one is a number. We know that grade point average is an actual number. So that one is a quantitative variable as well. So again, you could draw this out and we would have, I'm going to put self-esteem here. So SE, in there we go, self-esteem. And we have GPA. And so I'm going to put 0. And there's places that have above a 4, so I'll do 5 up here. And then for self-esteem, we're going to go 0, and we'll just say 100 as our maximum. And so we're asking, as self-esteem scores increase, so going that direction, does GPA increase? And we would do a scatter plot for this. So maybe this person has a GPA of 1, and we would put that 1, oops, sorry, let me undo that. I'll just leave it. So we have this GPA of 1, and then we have our self-esteem, and we'll say that looks like maybe a 20. So we would put our 20 first to indicate where that is on the graph, because that's our x-axis, so x goes first. This is our y-axis. So this would be 20, comma, 1 for GPA. And then this person has a little bit higher self-esteem, higher GPA, higher self-esteem, higher GPA, not perfectly in line, right? But we see a pattern here where there tends to be an increase. So because there's 2 quantitative variables and we're looking at how they change together, this is going to be an R relationship. Now, our third example, Professor Wyman thinks that students with higher attendance scores will get higher course grades. So in this one, again, we need to identify what our variables are. The first one is attendance scores. And because I use the word scores, that's going to be a quantitative variable. I could have measured attendance as attends most of the time or not, and that would be categorical, but we're saying higher attendance scores, we have a number. So that's our first quantitative variable. And then our second quantitative variable is course grades. And again, I have higher course grades, that indicates a number. So this is our second quantitative variable. And again, this would indicate a positive relationship. So on a scatter plot, we would see it going up and to the right. And this is an R relationship. Last example, is there a difference in anxiety between students with low, medium, and high socioeconomic status? So again, we're really focusing on categorical variables that have 2 levels. We might get further than that. We'll just see how the semester goes. But our first variable that I want to point out is socioeconomic status. So we have a categorical independent variable of socioeconomic status, and we cannot manipulate that. So this is a non-manipulated independent variable. But we have the 3 levels here, so low, medium, and high. So I indicated that these are categories. So if I give you something like this, you know that we're talking about categories. This is not a continuous number. It's not interval ratio. Our second variable is anxiety, and this is a quantitative dependent variable. So here we don't have manipulation. So this would not be experimental. It would not be causal. But if we were to do some kind of experiment, socioeconomic status would be more likely to affect anxiety. Of course, anxiety could have an effect on socioeconomic status, but we're just going with the more likely. So here, quantitative dependent, categorical independent. This has 3 levels, so we can still do a bar graph. So we could still look at the difference in anxiety. I'm going to call that A. And this would be a number. So again, just for simplicity, 0 to 100. And socioeconomic status are categories now. So we have low, medium, and high. And then socioeconomic status is our actual variable. These are just the levels of it. So we might expect to find that people with low socioeconomic status have more anxiety, maybe a little less anxiety for people with low or with medium socioeconomic status, and then maybe the least anxiety for people with high socioeconomic status. So this is a categorical independent variable with 3 levels, and this is a D relationship because we're looking at the differences between these 3 groups. So that is the process that you should be following to determine what type of relationship we are talking about. So again, you'll get test questions that give you a scenario like that, either a research question or a hypothesis, or just what a researcher thinks, and you'll need to identify what type of relationship it is based on the variable.